One of the most important ballot initiatives this November in California is going to be Prop 36. Today we're going to cover this.
It changes the law in that retail theft area. The first offense remains a misdemeanor. The second offense remains a misdemeanor, but on the third offense, it becomes a felony in the discretion of the court.
Prop 36 is going to reform Proposition 47. Some experts believe that Proposition 47 has caused homelessness, drug addiction, and retail theft to skyrocket in California, while other experts think that Proposition 47 has nothing to do with that, and reforming Proposition 47 could hurt the judicial system in California. My guest today is Greg Totten, CEO of California's District Attorneys Association. Today, he'll discuss the initiative to reform Prop 47 and how it will impact crime and homelessness.
On the drug side of things, our goal is to incentivize treatment.
Go to jail or go to rehab, right? Is that
correct? For those individuals who choose treatment, they'll never go to jail. Their conviction will be expunged if they successfully complete treatment.
Today's episode will focus on why Prop 47 should be reformed. But to get the complete story, be sure to check out our previous episode with Matt Gonzalez, who gives us his insight on why Prop 47 should not be reformed. We are presenting both sides of the argument so you can make a better decision this November. I'm Siama Korami. Welcome to California Insider. Greg, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Delighted to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Greg, we want to talk to you about a very important topic, and this is one of the hottest topics in the state, Proposition 36. Because of the retail theft and a lot of safety issues that's going on around California, you guys have put on a ballot proposition, Prop 36. Can you tell us what this is about?
Certainly, and thank you for asking. Proposition 36 is designed to, it's really got three pillars to it. The first pillar is addressing the retail theft issue. As the Public Policy Institute of California reported just a few weeks ago, retail theft in California went up 29% in 2022 and then 39%, a whopping 39% in 2023.
On top of what it went up in 2020?
Correct. So we have an exploding theft problem, cargo theft, porch piracy, fuel theft, and part of the reason that we're having those problems is because in 2014, Proposition 47 was approved by the voters. That took all major theft offenses in and around the retail space and converted them to misdemeanors. And so there are very low consequences. So under Proposition 47, an individual can steal from a business every day for 30 days. And as long as they steal less than $950, each one of those is treated as a misdemeanor. And so, unfortunately, many of the more serious offenders have recognized that there's no consequences, and they have stepped up their criminal conduct and are preying upon small business and large retailers alike. It's estimated in California that in 2022, retailers lost nearly $9 billion due to theft. And so what our initiative does in that area, in that retail theft area, is it changes the law so that the first offense remains a misdemeanor. The second offense remains a misdemeanor, but on the third offense, it becomes a felony in the discretion of the court. And so there can be felony consequences for those individuals who repeatedly prey upon retailers in that way. The second pillar is, now there are some other things. We also deal with smash and grabs. You've probably seen video, for example, in the Nordstrom store in Topanga Canyon in Los Angeles County, a group of offenders in the space of about 90 seconds stole more than $300,000 worth of high-end bags. And so we have another provision in the retail theft area that deals with those smash and grabs, so that if someone steals $50,000 or more, their penalty is enhanced. Or if they act in collaboration with other individuals, their penalty can be enhanced. Then in another area, fentanyl. fentanyl is literally poisoning, being used to poison countless people here in this country, and particularly here in California. We have over 100,000 overdose deaths annually. The CDC estimates that about 70% of those deaths are related to fentanyl, because fentanyl is a cheap, thin synthetic drug that is being manufactured. It's very inexpensive to produce, and it's being added to many other drugs. It is the most, I can tell you, in 4 decades as a prosecutor, it is the single most lethal drug I've ever seen. An ounce of fentanyl can kill 14,000 people. So it is exceedingly dangerous. And our legislature, just like in the retail theft space, they've had 10 years to deal with it, and they've done nothing. The same is true in the fentanyl area. We've run repeated bills that have all been defeated in committee. And so what our initiative does is, if you're a trafficker of fentanyl or other hard drugs and you're armed with a firearm, or you sell large quantities, your sentence can be enhanced. We also have a provision called Alexandra's Law that takes that fentanyl trafficker and warns them. If they sell again and someone dies, they can be prosecuted for homicide up to and including murder. So that's the second major pillar of the initiative. And then the third pillar is dealing with this crisis of homelessness. You know, it's a humanitarian crisis. We see people living in terrible circumstances, utter squalor. And here in California, our homelessness rate since 2014 has gone up by 51%. Meanwhile, the rest of the nation has gone down in many parts. And across the nation, it's only gone up about 11%. So California has a serious homelessness problem. It is related to Proposition 47. Proposition 47 took all hard drugs, things like cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl, and made them misdemeanors. So those individuals are cited. 75% of them never even make it to court.
If they're using or if they're selling?
If they're possessing those drugs. So there's literally very de minimis consequences for those individuals. And one thing we know about our homeless population is 80% of those who are chronically homeless, meaning homeless for a long period of time, suffer from serious substance abuse issues and serious mental health issues. We can't get those. We can't incentivize those people into treatment under existing law because everything's a misdemeanor. So what happens when those individuals show up in court? A judge will offer them a treatment program, but their choice is between going into a 12 months or an 18-month treatment program and being back on the street that afternoon and continuing to use drugs. And they almost always choose the latter course. Prior to Proposition 47, we had very robust drug courts, very robust treatment programs, and we were literally impacting people's lives in a positive way. When I was district attorney in Ventura County, I attended drug court graduations and heard these stories of people who had been hopelessly addicted, and then once they got into the drug court program, were able to turn their lives around, reunify with their family, and become productive, law-abiding citizens. What our initiative does is the first offense, the first possession of hard drugs, again, is a misdemeanor under Proposition 47, as is the second offense. But on the third offense, they become eligible for what's called a treatment-mandated felony. And the goal there is to have the felony consequence as a means of incentivizing them to take treatment. So they can face felony jail. They can face a felony conviction. In my experience as a prosecutor, many people, when they come to that realization that they could face serious time, they're willing to go into treatment. Tom Wolfe, who is a very outspoken former addict in San Francisco, says until he realized that he was looking at a lengthy jail sentence, he was unwilling to change his drug use practices. And it was that threat of a consequence that motivated him to change his behavior. That's what we're trying to do here. It's very much a focus on addiction and helping people who are addicts. It's trying to address the humanitarian crisis. So those are the three principal pillars of the initiative, and it is an amendment. The initiative at its core is an amendment of Proposition 47.
So you're not eliminating Proposition.
We're not repealing it. And that's one of the misnomers that's out there, that we're trying to repeal it. Nothing could be further from the truth. We're trying to fix its unintended consequences.
And what parts are you guys keeping?
Again, the first and second offenses remaining misdemeanors. Those are things we are not changing under that law.
And then for the drug position, marijuana and certain other drugs are not that.
We're only focused on hard drugs. There are 5 hard drugs that the initiative addresses that are among the most dangerous drugs used on our streets. It includes methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, PCP, phencyclidine as it's known, and then fentanyl. For other psychedelic drugs, marijuana, other drugs that are used by some Native American as a cultural matter, we don't address those at all.
We're covering California issues, as you know. If you want us to cover the stories that are impacting your day-to-day life in California, reach out to me at siamak@californiainsider.com.
Beyond the 3 pillars that I mentioned of Proposition 36, there is another indirect benefit, crime-solving benefit from this initiative, and that is when Proposition 47 took a whole host of theft and drug offenses and converted them to misdemeanors, they effectively prevented law enforcement from taking DNA samples from felony arrestees. So a broad group of arrestees who previously would have been required to give a DNA sample were no longer required. With Proposition 36, those individuals will now have to give a DNA sample, and we know from our experience that to the extent that you're able to enter more DNA profiles into the CODIS data bank, a nationwide and statewide data bank, you're able to solve more violent crime. We have one case, for example, out of Sacramento County where an 80-year-old woman was raped and murdered. The case was solved because an individual was arrested for a simple narcotics violation, and required by then law to give a DNA sample, and that DNA sample later connected him to this brutal murder some 20 years later. So there's an indirect benefit from this initiative as well in terms of solving violent crime.
You know, some of the critics might say that this could potentially lead to a lot of people get arrested. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a very misleading and false narrative. The LAO's office, nonpartisan public agency that's required to review initiatives, reported that this will only produce a few thousand in terms of increased commitments to prison. The numbers are not big, and that's because we know historically that a very small percentage of offenders commit the majority of crimes. And so to the extent that we have people who are career criminals, who are repeatedly preying upon stores and small businesses, we can focus on those individuals and essentially prevent them from continuing to commit those crimes. On the drug side of things, our goal, it's not a good use of scarce criminal justice resources to incarcerate somebody simply because they're a drug addict. We have no incentive in doing that. Our goal is to incentivize treatment and to get them into treatment. It's, they want to liken this to the old adage of the war on drugs. This is not a war on drugs. As one of the experts that we're working with, Dr. Anna Lemke, a best-selling author, Stanford University professor who is an addiction specialist, said this is not a war on drugs, it's a war on addiction. We're trying to help addicts. And unless we change our laws, we're not going to be able to motivate those people into treatment. And the problems with homelessness are going to continue. The overdoses are going to continue, and the deaths are going to continue.
So in your opinion, the retail theft is mainly by repeat individuals that are addicted, or is there an element of organized component in there?
There's both. We know that people who are living in homeless situations and are hopelessly addicted to drugs oftentimes, unfortunately, steal to support their habits. But we also know, particularly when you see some of these smash and grab offenses, we know that organized crews are engaged in this and do it in a somewhat vertical and organized structure where they'll have one group of people who will steal the products and another group of people who will sell them on a secondary market, whether it's out on the streets or through electronic means. So we've got both of those issues. And what's contributing to those issues is our lack of ability to hold people accountable for theft.
Do you trust the data with PPIC? Because we've heard that retailers are not reporting. A lot of people don't want to report what they're losing.
Very good point. One of the retailers that we're working with, who was an executive for a large Fortune 500 company and specialized in loss prevention, he told us that about 75% of retail theft is not reported. And it's not reported in part because they have difficulty getting frontline law enforcement to respond when they call and say, I've got this individual who just stole $50 worth of merchandise. Because law enforcement has resource and issues. And then secondly, even if law enforcement does respond and the case gets filed and prosecuted, the consequences are so de minimis it doesn't change the behavior. So many retailers, from a risk management standpoint, they don't want their employees to engage with thieves for fear that the employee would get hurt. They're concerned about the safety and well-being of their customers. So for some employers, they have just decided not to report some of these crimes. Not all of them, but it is a problem. And with regard to the PPIC data, I do trust them. They're expert researchers, and I think the fact that the retail theft problem has increased so exponentially, notwithstanding reductions in the amount of retail theft reported by store owners, to my way of thinking, leaves it unmistakably clear that retail theft is out of hand. I mean, for the average consumer, you walk into a store, what do you see? You see merchandise, detergent, baby diapers, locked up. You see reduced merchandise, reduced inventory, reduced store hours, and in some cases store closures. And there's a reason for that. The retailers are trying to protect themselves as best they can against this theft problem. And again, I think any person who looks logically at the issue, you can link it to 47. You can link it to Prop 47, taking away all felony consequences for those types of offenses.
Now, was there a time that you put it together that Prop 47 could be the cause of all of this?
Well, I think many of us, I was district attorney at the time Proposition 47 was approved, and I opposed it. I felt it was flawed policy, and I think most of my colleagues did. Most of law enforcement did, because we recognized that when you reduce consequences for crime, you typically get more crime. And that's precisely what we're experiencing now. I should talk about a few other things involving Proposition 36 that may not be well known by your viewers. And that is that the coalition that is leading this effort, I'm just one member of a very large coalition. It's made up of over 2,000 individuals and businesses. Today we have more than 1,000 small business owners who are supporting this initiative because they've been so profoundly impacted. We've talked to convenience store owners that have literally had to shut their stores because they can't make a profit. They're stolen from so frequently. So we've got a huge coalition of small business owners, but it's also a very nonpartisan coalition. Just earlier this week, we had 10 Democratic legislators sign on to this initiative. We've got the mayors of some of the most progressive cities in America, like San Francisco, Mayor London Breed of San Francisco, Mayor Matt Mahan of San Jose, Mayor Todd Gloria of San Diego, and Mayor Phil Brock of Santa Monica. These are communities that are known as being very progressive, very conscious about criminal justice reform, yet their mayors recognize the problem is so serious that they have signed on and are supporting this initiative. And so this coalition includes small business, it includes large retailers, it includes criminal, law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, local elected officials, social justice groups, minority organizations like the Black Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber are supporting it. So it is a very broad-based coalition that recognizes California has a problem and it's got to be solved. And that Proposition 36 is a very reasonable, very thoughtful, very humanitarian-oriented approach to solving it. And I think that's one of the reasons we've got such broad-based support.
Today's episode is sponsored by Monetary Metals. In today's world, traditional savings are often eroded by inflation. While the value of paper money diminishes, silver remains a stable, tangible asset. That's where Monetary Metals comes in. Imagine owning silver and earn 12% annual interest on silver, paid in silver. With Monetary Metals, you're not just holding silver, you're allowing it to grow steadily, increasing your wealth with a tangible real asset. It's a way to diversify and strengthen your portfolio over time. If you're interested in learning more about how to make your silver work for you, click on the link in the description or head to monetary-metals.com. Now let's go back to the interview. Some people are saying that Proposition 47 is already providing misdemeanors. Mm-hmm. And misdemeanors, if they're really prosecuted, they can put somebody in jail for 6 months. Why aren't they prosecuted? That's one question. The second part is, if you make them felonies, then the judge and the courts may not want to take them if it's theft. What are your thoughts on these?
Yeah, first of all, misdemeanors are, unfortunately, they're not treated as seriously as felonies by our jail system, by our court system, by every entity within the court system. They're viewed, properly so, as less seriously. And so they do not receive the level of resources. Many of the jails have policies, terms of misdemeanors being released rather than being held, simply because they're misdemeanor offenses. And it's got to be emphasized that we're not talking about everyone who steals being held responsible for a felony. We're talking about the worst of the worst. There has to be a mechanism to hold somebody accountable who is repeatedly preying upon a small business or a retailer and stealing from them. Those individuals have to be held accountable. And without felony consequences, they're not going to be held accountable in our current justice system. And we believe the majority of these people will be dealt with at the local level. As the LAO's office recognized, a small number will wind up in prison. But it will deter the conduct and it will change the behavior once we're able to hold them accountable. So the other thing to emphasize is it's not just the DA making the decision. This is subject to the discretion of the court. Our judges, who are independent elected officials who have the authority to take an offense that a DA has filed as a felony and say, under the law, I don't think this should be treated as a felony, and reduce it to a misdemeanor. So the system has many checks and balances in it, but the system has to be able to hold people accountable who are repeatedly preying upon businesses.
So do you think making them felonies will actually encourage the judges and other people in the judicial system to actually say, okay, this is serious now. This person has committed theft. This is their third time. This is a felony. Or do they go back and say, it's a theft, we should let it go?
The reality is judges, in my experience, are going to look at the crime that was committed and the offender that committed the crime. So if you've got a crime that is a first-time offense, it's going to be treated altogether differently. It's going to be treated much more leniently than a crime where you've got somebody who has committed a series of 10 to 20 thefts and stolen from multiple businesses and has a history of stealing. That individual, judges are going to take into account their background, their criminal record, and hold them appropriately and fairly accountable.
Right now, does it seem because of Prop 47, these cases are not really make it in front of judges, or the history doesn't add up? So it's
well,
like, do they look at
I'll give you one example. In Sacramento, the sheriff up there reports that they have 30,000 outstanding warrants for people
Wow.
for Proposition 47 type of offenses. Because what happens now when a police officer does respond to a store to take a report, and where somebody has been detained for stealing, the most that happens is that individual gets a citation. And that citation is nothing more than a promise to appear at a later date. We know about 75% of those citations never result in the person appearing in court. So they wind up having warrants issued on them and are held until someday when somebody contacts them, some law enforcement official runs into them in some other capacity. So if it's a felony, they can be arrested. Our justice system has to be able to promptly convict the guilty and promptly acquit the innocent. And when somebody is arrested on a felony offense, the wheels of justice move a little more expeditiously and the course is taken more seriously.
So in the current system, essentially, you can give people tickets,
right,
for them to show up to a court date. And if they show up, what will happen?
Typically now they'll be released. They'll be put back on the streets with a grant of summary probation, and they'll be told not to steal again, but very little consequences.
What if they steal again? What will happen?
The same thing, it'll be repeated. And that's part of the problem of Proposition 47. The fact that you've got prior convictions doesn't really weigh into the consequence for a misdemeanor offense.
And the misdemeanor, the concept of going to jail for misdemeanor, so the misdemeanors don't make it into the system, essentially.
There are some jurisdictions that do have the space and capacity to deal with misdemeanors, and certainly as DAs, we've been prosecuting those misdemeanors where they're presented to us. We will charge them and we will prosecute them. But in most jurisdictions, those individuals are not receiving any kind of serious jail consequence. I should mention on the drug side of it, one thing that's very important to note is that for those individuals who go into treatment and successfully complete it, remember I talked about the treatment mandated felony. For those individuals who choose treatment, they'll never go to jail. Their conviction will be expunged if they successfully complete treatment. That's how we're trying to incentivize people from saying, I want to get out of this problem that I've got, this drug addiction that I've got, and change. And once they do, the conviction will be expunged. It'll be as if it never occurred. Again, that's part of us trying to incentivize addicts to get help.
And before it used to be like this, right? You had drug courts and people had to either choose to go to jail or go to rehab, right? Is that
correct? Correct. Before this, we had, as I mentioned earlier, very, very robust, very strong drug court and treatment programs. The demand for those programs has substantially reduced since Proposition 47. And you have to remember, part of the presentation that the proponents made in support of Proposition 47 was less jail, more treatment. In reality, certainly Proposition 47 did reduce jail consequences, but it also reduced treatment. There wasn't more treatment, there was less treatment because there was no incentive to go into treatment. Our population, our prison population has gone from a high watermark of 170,000 down to about 90,000. And this initiative is not going to increase that population in any significant way. The numbers just aren't big enough to do that. And as I say, most of them will be handled at the local level.
So you think by the amendments you guys made, people would deter from committing retail theft, and the people that are addicted, they will end up taking treatment?
I think the numbers of people that are repeatedly committing theft will go down. They'll be deterred from repeatedly committing theft because the consequences for their conduct will increase if they do. We also believe very strongly that the numbers of people that are going into treatment and getting help through treatment will grow exponentially. And then we think it will have an impact upon our homeless population. We think it'll reduce. There's a number of other states that have somewhat similar laws, states like Michigan, New Jersey, Illinois, and those states have much lower issues in the area of drug addiction and homelessness. Now, it's not just a function of cold weather, warm weather. We've got warm weather states that have very low homeless populations as well. But you have to recognize that policy influences that. And if we have people who are hopelessly addicted to drugs, living in the streets, and we are unable to get them to go into treatment, they're going to continue in that lifestyle. That's what we're trying to change, is break that cycle of addiction.
And Greg, putting a ballot initiative like this in California is not easy.
It's
you have
not.
to get a lot of funding, you have to get a lot of support. What's the drive behind all this for you?
Well, for me, and I think for the coalition at large, is I'm a native Californian. I love California. It's a wonderful place to live. And my motivation is doing something that's good for the state and making a difference in the lives of countless people in a positive way. This initiative, I will just say, over the course of my career as a prosecutor, I've seen wide swings in criminal justice policy. You know, from everything from 3 strikes and you're out to criminal justice reform that is releasing many violent felons early. And this is not a wide swing. This is a very centrist swing back towards the middle. That's why it's embraced by Democrats, Republicans, independents alike, because we recognize that there's got to be change in California. We've got to get a handle on this homelessness issue, the fentanyl issue, and the retail theft issue.
And in this process of bringing this ballot initiative, was there a point where things go in a different perspective that you thought? Were you surprised by anything along the way?
I think I have consistently been grateful and a little surprised at how people have embraced this effort. You know, when we had to raise a fair amount of money to qualify the initiative because that's an expensive process. I was very pleasantly surprised by the numbers of people we had that wanted to contribute. But even more powerful than that was when we'd go to these signature gathering efforts, these volunteer signature gathering efforts, there's people standing in line. We had one signature event up in Sacramento and in Roseville that was done at an auto mall. And they had a line of cars waiting to get close enough to sign the petition that was, I think, several miles long. And I think it's because there's a lot of Californians out there that like this state, that love this state and want to see it turn around, and recognize that this is a thoughtful measure and are supporting it for that reason.
Greg, some people are saying that, especially the people in the legislature, and they're passing laws, that they're saying that this retail theft, there are criminals that have they have some entrepreneurial spirit, that they are hiring people to go to stores and steal things and then bring them out and then sell them online. And there's a bunch of players out there, and we should target those. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. We should target those individuals who are engaged in that conduct. Unfortunately, the legislation that has been approved is very narrow. They are largely half measures that don't address those most serious offenders. The rhetoric around them sounds good, but when you drill down and actually look at them, they don't do a whole lot. Part of the challenge for the legislature, I mean, in their defense, is Proposition 47 in its language was very clear. You can't amend Proposition 47 to increase punishment in any material way without going back to the voters, by the plain language of Proposition 47.
So those laws may not do anything if it's not coming from the ballot, right?
Correct. Not only that, but they will be challenged to the extent that they try to do that. And there was an op-ed recently in a legal publication by a 30-year criminal defense lawyer basically said, look, we'll challenge these laws as we're duty bound to do, and they'll get thrown out. So the challenge for the legislature is drafting in and around Proposition 47 in a way that doesn't violate Proposition 47. We believe some of the provisions that they've approved are going to get challenged by the defense bar once they become law and likely thrown out. We also believe that a lot of the provisions that they've drafted are not going to be terribly effective. They have too narrow an application. They're being billed as the solution to retail theft. They are simply tilting around the edges of retail theft. They're not addressing the core issue, the nucleus. The core issue involving retail theft is the issue of people who repeatedly steal. The legislation that came out of Sacramento does not address that core issue.
If you like California Insider and you like to know what's going on in California, make sure to check out Epoch Times. This is a newspaper that started by a group of Chinese Americans because of human rights abuses in China, and now is starting to grow here. Make sure to go to the Epoch Times website and check out the California section, where you can get a lot of fresh perspectives on what's going on in California. Now let's go back to the interview. Some people are saying on the drug side, the people that are on the streets selling these drugs, they're kind of making a living out of it. But the real drug dealers, we should go after the big players. What are your thoughts on that?
Law enforcement, for as long as I can remember, has focused a lot of its resources on addressing the large drug dealers, and we continue to do that. But people who are selling drugs on the street, even if they're selling small quantities, are wreaking havoc in our communities. For example, with fentanyl, they're poisoning people. Fentanyl is a lethal drug. It's the most dangerous drug I've seen in 4 decades as a prosecutor. And it's being added to other opioids. It's being added to drugs that are prescription medications. It's being sold as Percocet. It's being sold as Xanax. It's being advertised as one drug when in fact it is something else. And so the street level dealer certainly is not dealing drugs at the level of a large operation, but they're wreaking havoc on communities. They're poisoning people, and they're doing tremendous disservice to our communities, and they have to be held accountable. That's why our initiative, if you think about it, it has a very tiered structure. We deal with traffickers, the large traffickers that you spoke of, by holding them more accountable if they sell large quantities of hard drugs. Again, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, PCP, fentanyl. If you sell large quantities of those drugs, you'll be held accountable at a higher rate, more severe consequence. Likewise, those large traffickers who are selling drugs and carrying or using firearms are going to be held more accountable. But the street traffickers, they're still selling drugs. They're still, they may be using that to pay for their own existence. That doesn't make it lawful. When we start to say something like that is okay because they're subsisting, we're accepting that lawlessness is okay in our society, and I don't think that's what Californians want. I don't think Californians believe in that. They recognize that these kinds of conduct have potentially lethal consequences. They impact communities, they drive people to homelessness, and they have to be addressed. And so we're doing it in a very thoughtful way. Proposition 36 is a very measured approach to these problems that tries to get at the root issues.
Now, as a prosecutor, seeing what's happening, items are locked up and you see people that committing theft, all of that, how does it feel to see all of that?
Well, I think I probably look at it the same way any other resident of the state would look at, it's inconvenient when I go into a store and have to get a clerk to unlock a cabinet so I can buy a baby diaper or buy detergent. So I experience that same level of inconvenience. And as a prosecutor, I think I look at it from the standpoint of this is a defining conduct by retailers that are telling us the problem has gotten so out of hand that they cannot simply allow ready access to products on their shelves because they're being stolen in such large quantities.
Greg, do you have any other thoughts for our audience?
Please read Proposition 36 and go to the polls and cast your ballot. I believe if you vote for this measure, you'll be pleased with the results. We are going to make a difference in California. We're going to impact fentanyl. We're going to impact the scourge of a disease where people are being poisoned by this terrible drug. We're going to make a difference in retail theft by holding repeated thieves, people who go into stores and smash and grab and steal large valued items. We're going to make a difference in holding them accountable. And then finally, we're going to impact homelessness. We're going to impact homelessness by getting help for the people who are homeless through treatment and mental health treatment, drug treatment and mental health treatment. So I'm urging them to go to the polls and support Proposition 36.
Greg Totten, CEO of California's District Attorneys Association. It was great to have you on California Insider.
It's terrific to be with you. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you.